Lila Jackson stood at the edge of the grand driveway, her heart pounding as she gazed at the Harrington estate. The mansion rose like a monument to old money, its white stone facade gleaming under the afternoon sun, flanked by perfectly manicured gardens stretching like a royal carpet. Towering columns framed the entrance. The air carried the faint scent of blooming roses and the polish of privilege. She smoothed her simple yet elegant sundress, a vibrant blue that reminded her of the Jamaican seas her mother often spoke of, and clutched the invitation. It was more than just a card. It was a gateway into a world she had only glimpsed through James Harrington's stories. 8 months ago, Lila had met James at a community art exhibition in Chicago's Lincoln Park. She organized a booth for her third-grade students, showcasing their colorful drawings inspired by urban life. With his camera slung over his shoulder, James had wandered in, capturing candid shots of the children at work. His lens found her in a moment of laughter, helping a boy mix paints, and from that snapshot, their worlds collided. James, the heir to the Harrington fortune, built on real estate empires and old family ties, saw a spark of authenticity missing from his polished life in Lila. Lila, a dedicated elementary school teacher from Oak Park, found in him a kindred spirit who dreamed beyond his silver spoon. The invitation to the Art for All charity workshop had come as a surprise. James had organized a fundraiser at his family's estate in Lake Forest to provide art supplies and classes for underprivileged kids. "I want you by my side," he had said over dinner the week before, his blue eyes earnest. "Your passion for teaching is what inspired this whole thing." Lila had hesitated, knowing the whispers that followed their relationship. As a black woman from a working-class family, her father, Michael, managing construction sites, her mother, Grace, nursing at a busy hospital, she was no stranger to sidelong glances. But James insisted, and she agreed, hoping to bridge the gap between their backgrounds. As she approached the iron gates, a security guard emerged from his booth, his uniform crisp and impersonal. He glanced at her invitation, then at her face, his expression flickering with something unreadable, perhaps curiosity or judgment. "Miss Jackson," he said, his voice neutral. "Welcome. Mr. Harrington is expecting you." The gate swung open with a mechanical hum, and Lila drove her modest sedan up the winding path, feeling like an intruder in a fairy tale not meant for her. Parking near the entrance, she stepped out, the gravel crunching under her sensible heels. Two maids on the steps paused their conversation, their eyes lingering a beat too long before they resumed with hushed tones. Lila straightened her posture, drawing on the strength her parents had instilled in her. With his calloused hands from years in construction, Michael had taught her resilience. "Build your foundation, Lila. No one can knock it down but you." Grace, who had emigrated from Jamaica in the 1960s, shared stories of overcoming prejudice with grace and grit. "We Jacksons don't bend, we bloom," she often said. James appeared at the door, his face lighting up as he hurried down the steps. Tall and athletic, with tousled blonde hair and a warm smile that contrasted his family's cold demeanor, he pulled her into a quick embrace. "You made it," he whispered, his hand steady on her back. "You look stunning." Lila smiled, though nerves twisted in her stomach. "It's beautiful here, James. Like something from a movie." He chuckled, but his grip tightened slightly. "Just remember, it's all facade. You're the real thing." The opulence hit her like a wave as they entered the grand foyer. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, casting rainbows across marble floors. Guests in designer suits and dresses mingled, wine glasses in hand, their conversations a murmur of stocks, galas, and vacations. Eyes turned toward them, some polite, others appraising. Lila felt the weight of those stares, the unspoken questions. Who is she? Why is she here? James squeezed her hand. "Ignore them. This is about the kids, not them." But Elizabeth Harrington, James's mother, had other plans. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a flawless chignon, she glided through the crowd like a queen surveying her court. Her sharp green eyes locked on Lila, and a tight smile formed. Elizabeth had never hidden her disapproval. From the first time James mentioned Lila, she had probed. "A teacher? From Oak Park? How quaint." Behind closed doors, she confided in her husband, Henry, that Lila threatened their legacy. "She's not from our circle," she had said. "What will people say at the club? The charity boards?" Ever the pragmatic businessman, Henry had nodded but said little, his own regrets buried deep. Today, Elizabeth had invited select guests, including Sophia Langley, a socialite from a suitable family, hoping to steer James back on track. She approached now, air-kissing James's cheek. "Darling, you're finally here with your guest." Her gaze swept over Lila like a scanner. "Miss Jackson, how interesting to meet you properly." Lila extended her hand. "Thank you for hosting, Mrs. Harrington. The estate is stunning." Elizabeth's touch was brief, cool. "Yes, well, do come in. Everyone's eager to see James's little project." Claire Harrington, James's younger sister, emerged from a side room, her blonde curls bouncing as she eyed Lila with a smirk. "So this is her," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "I'm Claire. Nice dress. Very bold." James stiffened. "Claire, behave." But Claire leaned in, fingering the fabric. "Nordstrom? How accessible." A nearby woman chuckled, and Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had chosen the dress to feel confident, but here it screamed outsider. The workshop began in the ballroom, transformed with easels, paints, and cameras. Children from local shelters arrived by bus, their eyes wide at the grandeur. Lila dove in, helping a group sketch their dreams. "Art lets us see the world differently," she told them, her voice steady. James photographed the scene, his passion evident. But whispers circulated among the adults. Harrington's new fling? From the wrong side of town? One guest, an older man in a tailored suit, murmured to another, "Diversity higher for the photos, I suppose." Marcus Reed, James's lifelong friend, sidled up to Lila during a break. Tall and affable, with a quick wit honed from years in marketing, he grinned. "Tough crowd, huh? Don't let them rattle you. James has been raving about you since day one." Lila laughed softly, grateful for the ally. "It's more than I expected." Marcus nodded. "The Harringtons bark loud, but James is different. He's always been the rebel. Wanted to be a photographer, not a CEO." His words eased her tension, reminding her why she loved James. His quiet defiance against the mold. As the afternoon wore on, Elizabeth cornered James in a quiet alcove. "This has to stop," she hissed. "Sophia is here, perfect for you. End this before it embarrasses us all." James's jaw clenched. "Mother, I love Lila. She's not a phase." Elizabeth's eyes hardened. "Love? Please, think of the legacy, the company, the connections. If you continue, there will be consequences." Unbeknownst to them, Lila overheard fragments from the hallway, her heart sinking. Was this the beginning of the end? Back in the ballroom, a child tugged Lila's sleeve. "Miss, can I draw my family?" The boy's innocence cut through the fog of doubt. Lila knelt. Of course. Families come in all shapes, blood or chosen. As she guided his hand, James watched from afar, pride swelling. But the stares persisted, and when a photo of them together appeared on a guest's social media with a snide caption, "Harrington's charity case?" Lila's resolve wavered. The day culminated in a toast. Elizabeth raised her glass, to tradition and values. Her eyes avoided Lila. James countered softly, and to new beginnings. Lila met his gaze, drawing strength. Yet, as the event wound down, doubt crept in. Could their love survive this gilded cage? Little did she know, the real storm was brewing, with Elizabeth plotting to expose every flaw in Lila's background. By evening, as guests departed, Lila and James stole a moment on the terrace. The sun set over the gardens, painting the sky in hues of orange. "I'm sorry for them," James said. "You deserve better." Lila touched his arm. "We deserve each other. But James, if this costs you everything." He pulled her close. "You're worth it all." Their kiss under the fading light sealed a promise. But the whispers echoed, foreshadowing the battles ahead. The grand hall of Harrington Estate shimmered with chandeliers that spilled golden light across polished marble floors. Portraits of ancestors, stern-faced and richly robed, stared down from the walls as if to remind everyone of the weight of legacy. Beneath their watchful gaze, the charity workshop began. Long tables had been arranged with sketchpads, paints, and cameras for the children invited from underfunded schools across Chicago. The event, titled Art for All, was supposed to bridge worlds, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. James Harrington stood near the stage, his confident voice carrying through the hall as he welcomed guests. He introduced the workshop's purpose, emphasizing that art belonged not only to those with privilege, but also to children whose stories often went unseen. Applause followed, polite and measured, though Lila could hear whispers behind the clapping. She remained at her table, kneeling beside a little girl named Naomi, guiding her hand as she painted a field of bright sunflowers. "You have such a steady hand," Lila encouraged gently. "The yellow shines like sunlight. Keep filling the canvas. You are doing beautifully." Naomi grinned, her face lighting with pride. Lila's heart swelled as she looked around at the children, their laughter filling the hall. Yet just beyond the tables, among the well-dressed guests sipping champagne, she saw eyes lingering too long, lips curling with disapproval. Claire Harrington approached, her gown sweeping the marble floor like a whisper of ice. She leaned close, her voice dripping with derision. "Lila, you are truly in your element, aren't you? I mean, finger painting with children. How charming. But are you quite certain you are a teacher? You do look rather like a nanny tonight." Lila straightened slowly, fixing Claire with a calm smile. Her pulse raced, but her voice held steady. "I am proud to be a teacher. Helping children discover their voices through art is not a task beneath me. It is an honor." Claire tilted her head, the corners of her lips curling upward in mock amusement. How noble, truly. With that, she drifted back toward her circle of friends, laughter trailing in her wake. Before Lila fully recovered, Elizabeth Harrington stepped into the circle of light cast by the chandeliers. Regal in emerald silk, she radiated authority. Her tone was deceptively polite as she asked, "Tell me, Lila, about your family. What does your father do in Oak Park? And your mother? Surely they must be proud of you tonight." The question sliced beneath the civility, revealing the disdain it concealed. Lila felt every gaze in the room shift toward her. Still kneeling beside Naomi, she lifted her chin proudly. "My father manages construction projects. He builds homes, schools, and places where families live and grow. My mother is a nurse. She saves lives every day. They have given me everything that matters." For a brief second, silence followed. Elizabeth's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. Lila could almost hear the calculations behind that look, weighing and measuring her against invisible scales of worth. Then Elizabeth nodded coolly and turned away, leaving the sting of her presence lingering like frost. Naomi tugged gently at Lila's sleeve. "Miss Jackson, can I paint the sun bigger?" Lila's eyes softened as she returned to the child. "Of course, sweetheart. Make it as big as your heart wants it to be." Her words carried warmth, but inside, the sting of judgment remained. Across the hall, James raised his camera and snapped a candid photo of Lila leaning close to Naomi, her expression glowing with encouragement. The image captured her essence: strength, compassion, unshakable poise. He smiled, proud of her resilience. But later, as the workshop drew close and the children's artwork was displayed around the room, James's photograph found its way onto social media. The caption beneath it was laced with venom. "Harrington hosting a charity or flaunting romance?" The post spread quickly, screens lighting up with comments that ranged from mocking curiosity to outright cruelty. By the time Lila's phone vibrated with the notification, the photo had already been shared dozens of times. Her breath caught as she read the remarks. Some reduced her to an accessory, others questioned her intentions, and many echoed the same poisonous refrain. She did not belong in the Harrington world. James crossed the hall and saw her staring at her screen, her shoulders tense. His jaw tightened as he realized what had happened. "Do not read that," he said firmly, reaching for her phone. But Lila shook her head, holding it close. "I need to know what they say, James. Ignoring it does not make it disappear." "They are cowards," he said, his voice hardening, "hiding behind their screens, their gossip." "None of them matters," she looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the pain. "They matter because they are part of your world. And they are telling me again and again that I am unwelcome in it. James cupped her face in his hands, his voice softening. You are welcome in mine. That is the only truth that matters. Lila leaned into his touch, drawing strength from the certainty in his tone. Yet deep inside she wondered how long that truth could withstand the weight of expectation, the endless scrutiny of eyes that judged not by heart, but by heritage. The evening wore on. Guests wandered the hall, admiring the children's artwork while whispering their criticisms beneath thin smiles. Lila focused on the children, clapping and praising each painting with unwavering warmth. Still, every laugh behind her felt sharp, every sideways glance a reminder that she stood on ground not meant for her. At the close of the event, James gathered the children for a group photograph. Lila stood behind them, her hand resting gently on Naomi's shoulder. The camera clicked, freezing the moment in light, though the memory of whispers lingered heavier than the marble columns around them. When the hall finally emptied and the staff began clearing brushes and canvases, Lila stood alone momentarily, staring at the half-finished paintings. Each canvas held innocence, joy, and the beginnings of stories unburdened by prejudice. She wished she could shield them forever from the disdain she had faced tonight. James approached, his voice tender. I know this was not easy. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering. No, but I will not let them take away the joy I saw in those children's faces. That is why we came. That is why it matters. And he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Then we keep going. Together, Lila nodded, though she felt her heart's first tremor of doubt. Tonight had been only the beginning, and she knew the battles ahead would demand more strength than she had ever been forced to summon. The chandeliers dimmed as the staff extinguished the lights one by one. Hand in hand, Lila and James left the hall, their steps echoing against the marble floor. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the scent of roses from the gardens. The estate loomed behind them, both magnificent and suffocating. Lila breathed deeply, steadying herself. Whatever storm awaited, she would face it. For love, for dignity, for the right to stand without bowing. She glanced at James, who tightened his grip on her hand. His eyes told her he was ready too. Yet even as they entered the night, her phone buzzed again with another notification. The cruel photo followed them, a reminder that shadows stretched further than they could see. Still, Lila lifted her chin. She would not let those shadows swallow her light. The fight had only just begun. The garden behind Harrington Estate stretched wide beneath the twilight sky, roses blooming in cascades of crimson and ivory. Lila Jackson followed James down the gravel path, the echo of laughter and the clink of champagne glasses fading behind them as they left the glittering hall. Her chest still burned from the pointed remarks at the charity workshop, words that clung to her like a stain. Yet in the quiet hush of the garden, the tension began to loosen. James stopped near a stone bench carved with family crests, its surface cool with evening dew. He turned to her, his dark eyes softening, though worry shadowed them. Lila tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked at him, unsure if she should speak first. "You held yourself with such grace tonight," James said. His voice trembled with both pride and guilt. "I should have defended you harder. I should have silenced Claire, silenced my mother, before their words could cut." Lila shook her head gently. "You stood by me. That is more than enough. Their world is not mine, James. I am only learning its edges." She paused, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I felt their eyes on me, as though I were trespassing into a world that does not want me there." He reached for her hand, squeezing it firmly. "You belong with me. That is the only truth I know." For a moment, silence embraced them, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of music from the hall. Then James leaned back against the bench and sighed. "There is something I have never told you fully," he admitted. "I once had a dream of becoming a photographer. I wanted to capture faces, places, and the small miracles most people overlook. My father dismissed it as folly, and my mother as a distraction unworthy of our name. So I folded the dream away and placed it in a drawer I have not dared to open. Lila studied him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his confession. Yet tonight you led a workshop. You showed children the power of seeing the world through a lens. That drawer is not locked forever, James. You only need the courage to open it again. Before James could reply, footsteps approached along the gravel. Both turned to see Marcus Reed emerging from the shadows of the hedge. His tall frame was relaxed, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. He grinned when he spotted them, the familiar warmth in his expression breaking through the night's heaviness. "I should have guessed I'd find you hiding out here," Marcus teased, lowering himself onto the bench beside James. "You always retreat when the Harrington drama reaches a fever pitch. Remember the gala of 2009? You slipped out during the toast and nearly missed your own award." James chuckled, despite himself. "I had forgotten that." "Not me," Marcus said. "You and I wandered into that ridiculous hedge maze, spent nearly an hour trying to find our way back. Your mother nearly had the staff searching with torches." He laughed heartily, shaking his head. "You were always better at getting lost than playing the obedient son." Lila smiled faintly at the image, the tension in her chest easing as Marcus painted the memory. Something was grounding about his presence, as though he had known James in ways no one else in the estate could claim. "You have not changed much," Marcus continued, glancing at Lila. "You are still chasing what feels true, James. Except now you have someone who reminds you why it matters." He tilted his head toward her. "Do you know what he did when he told me about you?" He pulled out a photograph he had taken. It was the clearest image he had ever captured of life itself. Heat rose in Lila's cheeks. She looked at James, whose expression softened with unspoken confession. "He did not," she whispered. "I did," James admitted, his voice low. "That picture was of you at the exhibition, leaning close to study a painting. How the light caught your face made it seem like you were part of the artwork yourself. I knew instantly that you were not simply passing through my life. You were the center of it." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but words abandoned her. Instead, she let his gaze wrap around her like a promise. Marcus rose then, sensing their need for solitude. "Do not let them shake you, Lila," he said firmly. "I have seen James bend beneath his family's weight more times than I can count. But tonight, I see him standing taller. And that is because of you." She nodded, swallowing back a surge of emotion. "Thank you, Marcus." He tipped his head in a gentle bow and wandered back toward the mansion, leaving the two alone once more. The garden's stillness deepened, the stars emerging against the navy sky. Lila rested her head against James's shoulder, drawing comfort from his steady presence. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, the screen's glow casting light on her hand as she lifted it. A message from her mother, Grace, filled the display. "Are you all right, my love? I worry when you are in that place." Lila's eyes stung. She could almost hear her mother's voice, rich with the cadence of Jamaica, threaded with strength and tenderness. She typed quickly, "I am fine, Mama. James is with me." The reply came within seconds. "Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. They cannot diminish that." Her lips curved into a small, steady smile. She slid the phone back into her pocket and exhaled, letting the words root inside her. Grace had endured so much more, crossing oceans, facing the harsh stares of strangers, building a life where none had welcomed her. If her mother had stood firm, so could she. James brushed a thumb across her knuckles. "What did she say?" "That I am stronger than they think," Lila replied softly. "And she is right. I will not let their prejudice define me. I will not let it steal what we have." James pressed his lips against her temple, his voice fierce with conviction. "We will fight for this, Lila, for us, whatever it takes." In the Garden of Roses, under the watch of a sky trembling with stars, the vow bound them tighter than any diamond or decree. Though the shadows of Harrington Estate loomed just beyond the hedges, they claimed a space of light in that moment, together, unbroken and unafraid. The night stretched on, but the heaviness no longer crushed her chest. With James beside her and her mother's words alive in her heart, Lila felt a new resolve rising. For the first time since stepping into the estate, she believed she could stand within its walls and not bow beneath them. And as they lingered in the garden, the faint echo of music drifting on the breeze, she knew this was only the beginning of their battle, one she was no longer afraid to fight. The dining room of Harrington Estate stretched long and gleaming, with a polished mahogany table that could easily seat 30. Crystal chandeliers spilled light upon silver cutlery and porcelain plates rimmed with gold. Henry Harrington sat upright and unreadable at the head of the table, while Elizabeth commanded the opposite end with her sharp presence. James guided Lila to a seat beside him, his hand resting protectively on hers. Around them gathered the elite of Chicago, bankers and patrons of the arts, their conversations threaded with wealth and entitlement. Lila felt the weight of every stare. The scent of roasted duck and fine wine filled the air, yet she found no appetite. The evening had barely begun when Elizabeth's voice rose above the hum of chatter. "So, Lila," Elizabeth said, her tone deceptively polite. "We were just discussing the charm of our different neighborhoods. Tell us, what is life truly like in Oak Park?" The question seemed casual, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Dozens of eyes turned toward Lila, expecting her to stumble. She straightened her back, refusing to let her voice falter. "In Oak Park," she replied evenly, "we measure worth by kindness, not fortune. Neighbors share what little they have, and children grow up knowing they are loved. It is a place where hearts are valued above bank accounts." For a moment, silence settled over the table. Then Claire laughed sharply, her wineglass clinking against the table. "How inspiring," she sneered. "Our very own orator from the slums. Tell me, Lila, will you teach us to deliver speeches as well as you teach children to paint suns?" The words stung, but Lila met her gaze without blinking. "I will teach whoever wishes to learn," she said. James slammed his palm lightly against the table, his patience fraying. "Enough, Claire. You demean yourself far more than you hurt her." Claire's eyes glittered triumphantly, as if his anger confirmed her point. Elizabeth lifted a hand, her expression calm and controlled. "Please, James, let us maintain civility." The courses were served one by one, soup with truffle oil and venison with cranberry glaze, but to Lila each dish tasted of ash. The air grew heavier with every veiled remark, every mocking smile. She forced herself to smile at the servants and converse politely with a kind older guest who asked about her students, but the undercurrent of hostility pulled at her constantly. Finally, as dessert was placed before them, Elizabeth rose gracefully from her chair. "James," she said softly but firmly, "a word with you, please." James hesitated, his hand tightening around Lila's, but Elizabeth's gaze brooked no refusal. Reluctantly, he excused himself and followed her toward the oak-paneled study at the far end of the hall. Lila remained at the table, her fork untouched beside the untouched cake. Her chest tightened with unease. Claire leaned toward her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are brave, Lila. I will give you that. But bravery will not change bloodlines or alter the legacy our family protects. Do you truly believe James will throw it all away for you?" Lila's lips parted, but before she could answer, the heavy doors of the study closed behind James and his mother. Her heart beat faster, a storm gathering in her chest. She excused quietly and slipped from the dining hall, her steps echoing in the corridor until she reached the door. Inside the study, Elizabeth's voice carried, low and deliberate. "You are making a fool of yourself, James. This affair cannot continue. You have responsibilities and a future tied to this family. Choose her, and you will lose everything we have built. The company, the estate, the fortune will not be yours." There was a long pause. Lila stood frozen outside the door, her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her palm against the wood as if it could steady her shaking body. "Mother," James finally answered, his voice strained, "I love her. Lila means more to me than all of this." "And yet," Elizabeth cut in sharply, "I hear hesitation. Do not deceive yourself. You are torn, James. And she deserves better than half a heart." The words pierced Lila like a blade. Her pulse thundered in her ears as silence followed. She could not hear his response, only the quiet weight of his uncertainty. The estate walls seemed to close in around her, suffocating, relentless. She turned away, her steps unsteady as she fled down the corridor. The laughter and clinking glasses from the dining hall felt distant, hollow. Her chest ached with every breath, the echo of Elizabeth's ultimatum searing into her soul. When James emerged minutes later, his mother's expression, smug with victory, he found Lila's seat empty. Her untouched dessert sat abandoned, the silver fork glinting beneath the chandelier. He looked around frantically, but she was gone. Elizabeth touched his arm, her voice calm and commanding. "It is time you faced reality. Love is fleeting, legacy is forever." James shook her off, his jaw tight, his mind consumed by the image of Lila's pale face as she slipped away. He knew she had heard, and worse, he knew she doubted him. Outside, the night air wrapped cold around Lila, as she hurried through the gardens, her heart torn between love and despair. The roses swayed in the wind, their petals trembling like her hands. She longed to believe James would choose her, yet the silence she had heard inside the study echoed louder than any vow. The chatter continued in the dining room as though nothing had happened. Guests raised glasses, praised the evening, and planned their next social gatherings. But for James and Lila, the night had shifted irrevocably. The estate, once a place of grandeur, had become a battlefield where love and legacy collided. As the final candle burned low, the ultimatum hung in the air like smoke, inescapable, undeniable. Lila's heart knew the truth. To remain would be to lose herself, but to leave might mean losing James. And in that fragile moment, the choice seemed impossible. The following morning dawned with a sky streaked in muted gray and hints of pale sunlight forcing its way through. Ilara rose early, her thoughts restless, her heart unwilling to embrace the comfort of sleep. The palace was unusually silent, as though the corridors held their breath for what would come. Every servant she passed looked away quickly, murmuring hurried greetings, their eyes filled with both fear and curiosity. The revelation of the previous night had spread like wildfire, and though no one dared to voice their thoughts aloud, the air was heavy with expectation. Ilara moved toward the gardens, her steps slow but steady. She needed the calm of nature, the grounding scent of earth and flowers, to remind herself she was still part of something pure. The fountain's water sparkled faintly, and she touched its surface with trembling fingers. The cold sensation was real, anchoring her amidst the storm in her mind. She thought of her husband, Adrian, who now faced the consequence of his arrogance and betrayal. The memory of his eyes when truth struck him pierced her heart. There had been pride, denial, and a fleeting glimpse of despair he could not mask. Despite the fury he had caused her, despite the loneliness of raising her child alone, she could not erase the years they had shared. That conflicted tenderness gnawed at her, for love does not vanish simply because it has been wounded. Behind her, footsteps echoed. She turned to see Rowan, the loyal captain who had long been her silent guardian. His presence brought comfort and unease. He saw her as queen and the woman behind the crown. His eyes searched hers carefully before he spoke. "Your Majesty, the council has gathered. They demand clarity, not only about the king's actions, but also about your true lineage. They want to know if the woman they served in silence is the rightful heir." Ilara straightened, the weight of responsibility pressing upon her shoulders. "Then they shall know the truth. Hiding no longer serves anyone." Rowan bowed slightly, his gaze lingering with admiration and sorrow. "You have more strength than most men I have led into battle. Do not forget that." The council chamber was filled with tension as Ilara entered. A long oak table stretched across the room, its polished surface reflecting the flicker of torchlight. Around it sat men and women of influence, their faces lined with suspicion, hope, or fear. They rose respectfully, though their eyes questioned her every movement. One of the elder counselors, Lord Halric, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, forgive our bluntness, but the kingdom is shaken. We hear whispers that the blood of queens runs through your veins, that you are not merely consort, but sovereign in your own right. Speak, and let the truth stand in light or be cast aside." Ilara did not falter. She walked to the head of the table, her gown trailing behind her like a flowing shadow. She placed both hands on the wood, leaning forward slightly as her voice filled the chamber. "It is true. I am the daughter of Queen Seraphine, hidden to protect me from those who sought to end her line. I lived in silence, raised to endure scorn, to be overlooked. Yet silence has its limits. The day has come when truth can no longer be chained. A murmur rose, disbelief and awe weaving through the voices. Lord Halric raised a trembling hand. If this is true, then the throne was yours all along. The king, he deceived us, knowingly or not. The statement struck the council like a hammer. Eyes shifted uneasily. Betrayal by a monarch could fracture the foundation of loyalty, yet the presence of a rightful queen promised stability if she claimed it. Rowan stepped forward, his voice firm. You have seen her strength. You have felt her compassion. Do not question if she can lead, for she has already carried burdens greater than any crown. But not all were ready to yield. Lady Marin, sharp-eyed and ambitious, spoke with venom masked in courtesy. A throne is not won by lineage alone. The people must accept her, the nobles must bend, and what of the king? He still lives. His supporters will not sit idle while you rewrite destiny. Ilara lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. I do not wish to rewrite destiny. I wish only to reveal it. I will face the people myself. They will hear the truth from my lips, not in whispers of rumor. The council dispersed in uneasy silence, but the tide of change was already pulling them forward. Ilara knew what awaited her would be harder still. Truth was a double-edged sword, capable of cutting down lies and slicing open old wounds. That evening, she stood before the gathered citizens in the great square. Thousands pressed together, their faces upturned, their breaths a collective question. The torches burned bright, casting a halo around her as she stepped onto the platform. Adrian, restrained by guards, stood at the edge of the crowd. His eyes burned with pride and desperation, though his lips spoke no words. Ilara raised her hands, and silence fell. The sound of her own heartbeat echoed in her ears. She took a deep breath and let her voice rise, clear and strong. My people, you have known me as queen beside your king. But the truth is deeper. I am of the blood of Seraphine, rightful heir to this throne, hidden away to survive the blade of betrayal. I was silent, I endured, but I will be silent no longer. I stand before you not as shadow, but as light. A wave of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, some wept, and some whispered angrily. Ilara pressed on, her gaze fierce. I do not seek vengeance. I do not seek to destroy the man who wronged me. I seek only to give this kingdom what it deserves: honesty, justice, and strength. You must decide if you will walk this path with me. The crowd erupted, some voices shouting allegiance, others calling for Adrian's name, demanding loyalty to tradition. For a moment, chaos reigned, but amidst it, Ilara stood still, unshaken. Her calmness was a flame in the storm. Adrian, seizing his chance, cried out, You call her queen, yet I am the one who held this kingdom together. I am your king. His voice cracked with desperation, his once unshakable authority unraveling before all. The people turned on him, their eyes narrowing with discontent. They had seen his arrogance, they had felt his neglect. His words rang hollow against the weight of Ilara's truth. Rowan drew near Ilara, murmuring, They begin to see. Do not falter now. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting courage settle deeper in her chest. When she opened them again, her vision was clear. This was no longer a battle of pride, but of redemption, hers and perhaps even Adrian's, should he one day seek it. The night ended without a clear resolution, but seeds had been planted. Whispers of loyalty to Ilara grew stronger. The nobles convened again in secret, realizing the power of a queen with a rightful claim and the support of the people. Ilara returned to her chambers, exhaustion weighing upon her body. She stood before the mirror, gazing at her reflection. For the first time, she did not see the woman forced into silence, or the queen dismissed as unworthy. She saw herself as she was, bearer of truth, wielder of resilience, and perhaps the architect of redemption for an entire kingdom. As she extinguished the last candle, she whispered to the darkness, not as a plea but as a vow. "I will not be broken, not again, not ever," and the silence that followed was not oppressive but reverent, as though the walls themselves bowed to the promise of their queen. The mansion lay in stillness under a veil of moonlight, its grand windows dark except for the faint glow spilling from the library. Inside, silence hung heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of fabric or the distant ticking of an ornate clock. Lila sat alone in her room, the letter before her trembling slightly in her hands. Her chest felt tight, as though the air around her had grown thicker, harder to breathe. The words she had written echoed in her mind. "James, I do not want you to lose your family because of me. Let me go. I love you." She had folded the paper with care, placing it beside her dress. Every fold was deliberate, a small act of finality. Outside her window, the wind stirred the garden leaves, whispering something she could not yet name. Her thoughts drifted to the events of the previous night. Elizabeth's ultimatum still burned in her mind, the cold certainty in her voice that James must choose between her and the Harrington legacy. She had overheard enough to know his hesitation was real. No matter how fierce, love could not erase the weight of expectation pressing upon him. She loved him enough to let him choose, but not enough to stand in the way of his peace. Quietly, Lila rose, gathering her belongings with careful movements. She did not wake James, she could not. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving without explanation, but she knew her presence now would only add to his conflict. The hallways were hushed, and servants long retired to their quarters. She moved like a shadow, her slippers silent against the marble floor. In the corridor, she paused, the silence pressed against her like a living thing. Somewhere deep within, a voice whispered doubt. Was she abandoning him or protecting him? She had no answer. The only certainty was that her departure was necessary. She reached the carriage house without disturbance. The carriage was ready, the driver waiting quietly in the shadows. Lila stepped inside, the scent of leather and polished wood comforting in its familiarity. The door closed softly behind her, sealing her departure. As the carriage rolled away from the estate, Lila leaned back against the seat, her fingers brushing the letter in her lap. Her thoughts turned to her mother, Grace, and the words she would speak when Lila called later. Grace had been her anchor, teaching her that strength often meant letting go, and that dignity could be found in choosing peace over pride. It was nearly dawn when she reached the small inn at the edge of town. The streets were empty, and the air carried the crisp morning chill. Lila diligently paid for the room, asking for the quietest chamber. She wanted solitude, a space to gather before speaking with her mother. In the dim light of her room, she placed the letter again on the table beside her and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered before she dialed her mother. When Grace answered, her voice was gentle, lined with concern. Lila drew in a slow breath. "Mama, I left Harrington Estate." A pause followed, long enough for Lila to feel its weight. "I thought you might," Grace said softly. "Are you safe, child?" "Yes," Lila whispered, though her voice trembled. "I am safe, but my heart is heavy." Grace's voice grew firm, a steady anchor in the storm. "You carry more than you think, Lila. I have walked that path. They will judge you, but your heart will know the truth. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from." Tears pricked Lila's eyes. "I love him, Mama. I love James, but I cannot be the cause of his ruin." Grace's sigh was both tender and knowing. "Love is a battle, my child. But sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go so they may find their own way." Lila smiled softly through her tears. "I wish I could be braver." "You are braver than most, Lila. Never forget that." She ended the call, placed her phone down, and stared at the letter again. Outside her window, the first light of dawn touched the world, softening the edges of the night. Lila felt a strange stillness in her chest, a mixture of sorrow and resolve. She had made her choice, though it was painful, it was hers alone. Her thoughts wandered to James, imagining him waking to her absence. She pictured his face, the moment of realization when the truth sank in. She feared his pain, feared that her departure would wound him beyond healing. Yet she believed in the resilience of their love, trusting that it could survive even this sacrifice. At breakfast, the inn was quiet. The scent of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of morning conversation. Lila ate slowly, her mind elsewhere, tracing the memories of the nights she had spent at Harrington Estate. Each one was vivid, the laughter they had shared, the stolen moments in the garden, his hand finding hers as if by instinct. Those memories were hers now, treasure she would carry even in her absence. Later, she stepped outside and walked through the town's small streets. The market was just waking, stalls being set up with fruit, bread, and flowers. There was a simplicity here she had long forgotten, a sense of life untouched by wealth and privilege. She found comfort in it. When she returned to her room, she took the letter and folded it neatly before placing it in her coat pocket. She would not leave without sending it to James, though she knew it might not reach him for days. It was not a goodbye she could speak aloud. It was a farewell, written in silence. Lila sat by the window that night, watching the moon rise pale and steady in the sky. Her mind wandered between the past and the uncertain future. She thought of James walking those halls without her, Elizabeth's satisfied smile, and the fragile possibility of reconciliation. Her heart ached with all that was lost and left unsaid. The door to her room opened softly, and the innkeeper peeked in. "Miss Jackson, dinner is ready." She nodded, standing slowly. Her movements were deliberate, measured, as though each step was a vow she made to herself. She dressed simply, avoiding mirrors, and went to the small dining room. The inn was quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of cutlery and a few guests' low murmur. Lila ate with slow care, her thoughts turning again to her mother's words. Strength was letting go, and perhaps letting go was exactly what she needed to do. After dinner, she returned to her room and lit a candle. The flame flickered softly, casting shadows across the walls. She sat at the desk, pen in hand, and wrote again. This time it was not for James, but for herself, a testament to her choice. "I have chosen the road that demands courage. I leave not because I love him less, but because I love him enough to let him choose freely. My heart remains with him, yet I must find my way forward." She folded the paper carefully and placed it beside her coat. Her eyes lingered on it for a long moment before she blew out the candle, letting darkness fill the room. At dawn, she would leave the inn and travel further away, far enough that Harrington Estate could no longer call to her. Yet even in her absence, she knew she carried pieces of it within her. James's voice in her memory, the scent of roses in the gardens, and the echo of her vow. That night, Lila fell asleep with the letter in her pocket and a quiet resolve in her heart. She did not know what lay ahead, but knew this was her path. It was not one of surrender, but of strength. And in the stillness before dawn, she dreamed of a life where love and freedom could exist side by side. The Harrington Estate woke to a tension thicker than the morning mist. Once filled with laughter and polite conversation, the grand halls echoed with silence and restrained whispers. James paced in his study, the letter Lila had left still clutched in his hand. The words seemed to burn into his skin, each line a reminder of the choice he had delayed for far too long. He had searched the house, calling her name softly and with increasing urgency. But the halls offered no answer. Even the servants, careful in their duties, avoided his gaze. The absence of Lila was a wound that no formality could conceal. His mother's ultimatum from the night before now rang in his ears, her cold certainty haunting him. "Choose Lila," she had said, "and lose everything." He had been unable to answer her then, but now the silence pressed him toward a decision. In the main hall, Claire awaited him, her posture sharp, her expression a mixture of triumph and contempt. When James entered, she did not rise. Instead, she met his gaze with a smirk. "She is gone," Claire said simply, "and it is your fault." James closed the door behind him with a quiet but firm motion. "I should have spoken to her. I should have stopped Elizabeth before she convinced me to doubt myself." His voice carried frustration tinged with grief. "But she left before I could explain." Claire rose, crossing the room with measured steps. "Explain what, James? That you were torn between her and your legacy? That you let her walk away rather than face your family? That is not a strength, that is a weakness." James ran a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You do not understand, Claire. It was never a weakness, it was fear. Fear of losing her, but also fear of losing everything I have worked for. I have lived my life under the weight of this name. I thought I could carry both. I was wrong." Claire's lips curled into a bitter smile. "And now she is gone, and perhaps she will never return. Was that what you wanted?" Before James could answer, Henry entered the room. His presence was calm but heavy, carrying the gravity of years lived with both pride and regret. He studied his son for a long moment before speaking. "You have known duty all your life, James. You have lived by it, sacrificed by it. But what is duty if it demands the surrender of the heart?" James lifted his eyes, meeting his father's gaze. "I know what I owe the Harrington name, Father, but I also know what I owe Lila, and I cannot repay either without losing myself." Henry stepped closer, placing a hand on James' shoulder. "I once chose the family, sacrificing my music dream to secure our legacy. I believed it was my duty, but I lived with the weight of that choice every day. I see now that duty is not the absence of choice, but the courage to make it. If your heart lies with her, then you must act. Otherwise, you will carry regret for the rest of your life." The words struck James deeply, echoing in the quiet of the study. He straightened, a resolve forming in his expression. "Then I choose her, whatever the cost." Claire's eyes narrowed, but Henry nodded with quiet approval. "Then there is no more time to waste. Find her before she disappears from your life forever." James left the study without another word, his mind a torrent of emotion. The corridors of Harrington Estate seemed unfamiliar, the walls whispering of absence and loss. Every step he took carried the weight of his choice, each one bringing him closer to the reality he had been avoiding. He sought Marcus first, his oldest friend and confidant, who had often stood at his side in moments of doubt. Marcus listened quietly as James spoke, the determination in his voice unshaken. "She went to the inn in Greystone," Marcus said finally. "I will go with you. You should not search for her alone." James nodded, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. Let us go before the day is lost." The carriage was ready within the hour, horses pawing at the cobblestones impatiently. James stood at the threshold of the estate, glancing back once at the grand silhouette of Harrington before stepping inside. The weight of his decision pressed on him, but a spark of hope was beneath it. He would find her. He would speak to her. He would make her understand. The ride to Greystone was swift, the countryside blurring past in a mosaic of green and gold. James sat silently beside Marcus, his thoughts a tangled web of fear and longing. Every mile carried him closer to her, but also closer to a moment that could change everything between them. When they arrived, the inn was quiet, the morning air still crisp with the scent of dew. James stepped from the carriage, his boots striking the cobblestone with purpose. He approached the innkeeper, whose expression betrayed surprise at his arrival. "Miss Jackson is here," the innkeeper said softly, glancing toward the upper floors. James nodded, exchanging a brief look with Marcus before ascending the stairs. The corridor outside her room was silent, as if it too awaited the confrontation that was to come. He stopped before the door, his hand resting lightly on the wood. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound almost deafening. Inside, Lila was seated by the window, the pale light casting her silhouette in delicate relief. She did not turn as he entered, her gaze fixed on the first light of day. "Lila," James said softly. His voice was low, carrying the weight of everything he had not said. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and guarded pain. "James," she whispered, her voice barely above the morning's hush. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I should have stopped you last night. I should have told you how much I love you, how much I want you. I was torn, but I see now that nothing is worth more than us." Lila looked away, her hands clenched in her lap. "You said that before, but last night you hesitated. You let them choose for you." James shook his head, his voice firm. "No, I was scared. I feared losing you, but I feared losing myself even more if I made the wrong choice. I know now that my choice is you. I will face whatever comes for it." Her eyes searched his, and for a moment there was silence, the weight of their history pressing between them. "You cannot know what it means to leave everything behind," she said softly. "It is not a decision I took lightly." "I know," James said, "but I will carry it with you. Wherever you go, I will follow." Leela's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked away again. Then prove it. Prove it by staying, by fighting for us. James reached for her hand, lifting it to his lips. I will prove it every day of my life. Leela felt hope for the first time since she left Harrington Estate. But even as they stood together, the road ahead was uncertain. Elizabeth's ultimatum still hung in the air, and the Harrington legacy was not easily set aside. Marcus cleared his throat softly, reminding them that the journey was far from over. The morning light grew stronger outside the window, casting long shadows across the floor. They did not speak further, letting the silence speak for them. Words would come later. Their hearts beat in quiet agreement for now. They would face whatever came together. The morning air in Greystone was crisp with the scent of rain and earth. James awoke before dawn, restless and determined. Sleep had been elusive, his thoughts consumed with Lila and the weight of the choice he had finally made. He had been certain that finding her would be enough, but now he understood that speaking her name was only the first step toward healing what had been broken. Marcus was awake, sitting quietly by the window with tea. He looked up as James dressed. She will not forgive easily, Marcus said softly, his voice steady but tinged with concern. You must go to her with patience, truth, and proof that your choice is unwavering. James nodded, fastening his coat. I will. I cannot bear to lose her. Not now, not ever. They left the inn while the town slumbered, the streets hushed and damp from the morning mist. The carriage took them toward the coast, the road winding through hills where wildflowers grew in careless abundance. James watched the scenery pass with a quiet longing. Somewhere ahead was not only Lila, but also the hope of a future they had both been denied. When they arrived at the small apartment Lila had chosen, James felt the weight of every step. He could not predict how she would respond. She might turn him away. She might not believe his words. But he knew he must try. He owed her that much. Marcus knocked gently, then stepped aside. James took a deep breath and entered. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with soft light streaming through lace curtains. Lila stood by the window, her profile outlined by the morning glow. She did not turn when he entered. Silence momentarily filled the room. I have come to find you, James said quietly, closing the door behind him. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of all he had held inside. To tell you that I choose you. Always Lila turned slowly, her eyes searching his. There was pain there, but also an unspoken question. Why now? You left without a word, she said softly. Why should I believe you now? James stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers, stopping just short. Because I have learned that words alone are not enough. I must show you. I have found a place for us, a home of our own. Not bought with the Harrington name or burdened by its legacy. A place where we can start anew. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a minor brass key. Lila stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. This is the key to our apartment, James continued. I have rented it with my money, without using the family fortune. It is ours, Lila. A new beginning, built by us alone. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the key, then on James. There was pain in her gaze, but also something softer, hope. You make it sound simple, she said, trembling. But leaving is never simple. And I am afraid, James. Afraid of being hurt again. James closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I cannot promise there will be no pain. But I can promise that I will stand by you through it all. I will fight for us every day. Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away briefly before meeting his gaze again. And what of your family? What of Elizabeth's threat? James tightened his grip on her hands. I will face it. Whatever comes, I choose you over all of it. Lila's breath caught, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She did not speak, but their silence carried the weight of her answer. Slowly, she stepped closer, letting her head rest against his chest. James held her tightly, as if anchoring her to him, to the moment, to his promise. Outside, the rising sun's light spilled through the window, bathing them in warmth. After a while, Lila pulled back slightly, searching his face. If we do this, there will be no turning back, she said softly. James nodded, his eyes steady. There will be no turning back, only forward, together. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and she pressed her forehead to his. "Then I will come back with you." They stood there for a long moment, the silence filled with their breaths and the beating of their hearts. It was not a return to what they had, but the beginning of something new. Later that day, they packed what little Lila had brought with her and left the apartment. James walked beside her, the key clutched tightly in his hand. Every step toward Harrington Estate felt heavier, as if they were crossing into another world where their choice would be tested. The carriage ride was quiet, with the unspoken promise that neither would break the trust they had rebuilt. James thought of what lay ahead: Elizabeth's confrontation, the whispers of the court, the challenge of proving their love against the tide of doubt. But beside him, Lila walked with steady determination, her presence reassuring. When they arrived at the estate, the air was thick with anticipation. Servants hurried past them, their eyes fixed on the couple with expressions of curiosity and disbelief. James led Lila to the main hall, where Elizabeth awaited, her posture regal but her expression guarded. "You return," Elizabeth said simply, her voice a blend of surprise and challenge. James stepped forward, his voice clear. "We do, and we are here to stay. I chose Lila. I have chosen her and will stand by her, no matter the cost." Lila met Elizabeth's gaze steadily. "I am not here to take from this family. I am here because I choose to stand with James. Together, we will face whatever comes." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, Henry stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried undeniable conviction. "James has made his choice. Let us honor it. Love is stronger than pride, and unity is born from acceptance." There was silence in the hall, the words settling like stone in the air. Elizabeth's expression softened for the briefest moment, though her lips remained pressed in a firm line. James took Lila's hand, lifting it gently to his lips. "This is where we begin, together." Lila squeezed his hand in return, a quiet affirmation. Outside, the sky broke into shades of gold and rose, the promise of a new day unfolding before them. And in that moment, amidst the weight of history and the whispers of the past, they stood together, ready to face whatever future awaited them. The rain fell in steady sheets over Harrington Estate, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the tension within the mansion. James and Lila returned together, the weight of their decision settling over them like a storm that had yet to pass. Their steps echoed in the grand hall, a quiet proclamation that they were not merely returning, but choosing to face whatever awaited them. The guests had gathered for a private evening, a small affair hosted quietly in one of the drawing rooms. Sophia Langley was among them, her presence deliberate, her smile poised with subtle malice. Elizabeth stood nearby, her posture cold, as if this gathering had been arranged to test them. James led Lila forward, ignoring the whispers and sideways glances that followed them. Claire's eyes flashed with disdain as she watched them enter. She stepped forward, her voice carrying across the room. "You have returned, James, but I wonder if you have truly thought this through." James stopped before her, his gaze unwavering. "I have thought about it every day, and I chose her. Whatever comes, this is where I stand." Claire's laugh was sharp, cutting through the murmured conversations in the room. "This is not a choice, James. This is a reckless surrender. You are abandoning your duty, your family, your legacy." Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I am not here to abandon anyone. I am here because James and I have chosen each other. That is enough for us." Elizabeth moved closer, her expression unreadable. "Enough for you does not erase the consequences for this family." Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of a challenge. "You think you can step into our world and change it with mere words." James did not flinch. "I will prove it, Mother. Love is worth more than pride and titles." The room was silent, the air charged with unspoken conflict. Then Sophia Langley, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward with a refined smile. "It is admirable," she said softly, "to claim such conviction. But the world does not bend to conviction alone." Her gaze lingered on Lila. "Perhaps this is why some believe you are nothing more than a project, a novelty to be discarded when inconvenient. Lila's eyes narrowed. "I am not here for approval, Sophia. I am here because I belong with James. Nothing will change that." The tension in the room was palpable when Henry entered quietly, placing himself beside James. His presence commanded attention without demand. "Enough," he said firmly. "We have lived long enough under the shadow of expectation. It is time to listen to the hearts of those who live here now." Elizabeth's eyes flickered with emotion, a mixture of pride and sorrow. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered on James and Lila, as though weighing the truth of Henry's words. Claire turned sharply away, her expression tight with anger, leaving the room without another word. A few guests murmured, some nodding in quiet approval, others whispering with curiosity. The atmosphere shifted, a sense of quiet support forming for the first time in the confrontation. Henry approached Lila slowly. "You have shown courage," he said, his voice low. "Perhaps more than I ever have. You remind me of my mother. She too was not afraid to stand against what was expected. You should know that this is not easy for any of us." Lila met his gaze steadily. "I did not come here to fight your approval, sir. I came because I love James." "James," Henry nodded, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then I will stand with you both. It is not my way to stop love when it is true." Outside, the rain began to lessen, soft drops tapping against the windows as though echoing Henry's words. James turned to Lila, his expression softened by relief and determination. "We will face whatever comes, together." She nodded, her hand finding his. The touch was a quiet vow, a promise that neither storms nor opposition could break. But the confrontation was far from over. Elizabeth stepped forward, her eyes fixed on them both. Her voice was measured but heavy. "This is not the end. You may have found allies within these walls, but the Harrington legacy is not so easily set aside. There are battles still to come." James did not flinch. "Then we will face them, together." The room became silent again, the weight of Elizabeth's words lingering. Yet beneath the tension, there was a subtle shift. Support had begun to take root, unexpected but undeniable. Guests who had stood in quiet doubt now looked toward them with curiosity and, in some cases, respect. Marcus stepped forward, his voice warm and steady. "What they have is worth defending. You see it, I see it, and I stand with them." His words carried through the room, gathering a quiet chorus of agreement. Lila felt a warmth she had not expected, which came not from victory, but solidarity. She glanced at James, who smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the same relief she felt. Together, they stood in the center of Harrington Estate, surrounded by both challenge and unexpected support. Elizabeth's gaze softened slightly. Though she did not speak, it was Henry who broke the silence. "Let this be the moment we choose who we are, not by inheritance, but by the courage to stand for our beliefs." The words hung in the air like a promise. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the world washed and brightened, as though the storm had been a necessary trial. Lila and James held hands, a quiet defiance in their stance. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be opposition, whispers, and tests. But there was certainty between them for the first time since Lila had left. They would face it together, and in the quiet of the grand hall, with the eyes of friends and foes alike upon them, a subtle but undeniable change had begun. The Harrington estate was no longer the same. Neither were they. Outside the windows, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the marble floors. It was not just a new day, but a new beginning. The morning sunlight spilled into the Harrington estate, casting a golden glow across the grand hall where Lila and James had gathered with the family. The air was still tinged with tension, but a sense of cautious hope lingered like a fragile bloom. Henry had arranged a private gathering to bridge the gap between old traditions and new beginnings. Lila stood quietly as Henry approached, carrying a small box wrapped in simple paper. The gesture alone felt unexpected and sincere. He handed it to her with a gentle smile that spoke of unspoken understanding. "This belonged to my grandmother," Henry said softly. "She believed love should be given freely, without fear of loss. I want you to have it as a reminder that courage and compassion can change hearts and minds." Lila opened the box carefully, revealing a delicate silver necklace. The craftsmanship was intricate, the pendant shaped like an open heart with tiny etched flowers. Her fingers traced the design, and a warmth spread through her chest. "It is beautiful," she said, her voice low and reverent. "I do not know what to say." Henry shook his head gently. "You do not need to say anything. Let it be a symbol of trust and understanding. You have taught me much about acceptance and the strength of love. Wear it not just as a gift, but as a promise to yourself and each other." Tears glistened in Lila's eyes as she fastened the necklace around her neck. She felt the weight of the gesture, the care behind it, and the subtle shift in Henry's attitude. He had acknowledged her presence not as an intruder, but as a person worthy of respect. James stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "I hope you understand what this means," he said. "It is not just a gift. It is a sign that we can move forward, that the past does not define us, and that love can create change." Lila nodded, taking a deep breath. "I do understand, and I will honor it, not just for me, but for us." The small gathering then moved to the dining room, where a light breakfast had been arranged. The atmosphere was cautious and polite, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity and emerging acceptance. Guests who had once regarded Lila with thinly veiled skepticism now approached her, asking about her students and the art program she led. Lila spoke with warmth and clarity, recounting stories of the children she taught, and the joy she found in helping them express themselves. Her words, filled with passion and sincerity, gradually won over the listeners. Smiles replaced skepticism, nods replaced whispers. For a moment, the air of the Harrington estate softened, the walls echoing not with judgment, but with understanding. Elizabeth observed quietly from a distance, her hands folded, her eyes on the interaction. There was a flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps realization, but she did not speak. Her silence, however, was less rigid now, tinged with the possibility of change. James followed Lila as she engaged with the guests, pride and admiration evident in his gaze. He had seen her strength, patience, and ability to navigate a world that had often sought to diminish her. Watching her now, he felt a surge of love and respect that deepened his commitment. As the morning progressed, Henry suggested a walk in the gardens. The estate's grounds were lush and expansive, filled with flowering trees, winding paths, and hidden alcoves that offered quiet reflection. Lila and James strolled side by side, the silver necklace catching the sunlight with each step. "You have changed something here," James said quietly, his voice full of awe. "You have shifted the air, Lila. Even in a single day, you have shown them what matters." Lila smiled, a hint of relief in her expression. "I do not know if it is enough. There are still those who will not understand, who may never accept me." James stopped walking, turning to face her. "It is not about convincing everyone. It is about standing together, showing them our true and steadfast love. That is more powerful than any words or judgments." They continued walking, the flowers in bloom, their colors vibrant against the estate's green. It was a world of contrasts, tradition and change, expectation and freedom, old prejudices and emerging acceptance. Lila felt the significance of her presence, not as an intruder, but as a catalyst for transformation. Later, they returned to the main hall, where Elizabeth approached quietly. Her steps were measured, her expression guarded. She held a folded note in her hand, extending it to Lila. "I do not fully understand," Elizabeth said, her voice soft but deliberate. "But I want to try. This is a start." Lila took the note carefully, sensing the sincerity beneath the caution. "Thank you," she replied gently. "That means more than you know." Elizabeth nodded, a subtle shift in her posture hinting at a thawing of old barriers. She did not speak further, but the gesture was significant, acknowledging change and a tentative opening to understanding. Throughout the day, Lila and James continued to navigate the delicate balance between their love and the expectations of the Harrington family. Each conversation, each small act of engagement, gradually built bridges. Lila spoke with humility and strength. James supported her with unwavering presence, and even those who had doubted them began to see the sincerity of their bond. By afternoon, the air in the estate had softened. Lila sat with a small group of guests who had once been critical, discussing her art program's impact on the city's children. She felt the warmth of their interest and the subtle approval of their attention. It was a quiet triumph, one built not on confrontation, but on patience, empathy, and the undeniable truth of her character. James watched her, pride shining in his eyes. He knew this was more than a victory for their love. It was a transformation of perception, a gentle but powerful shift that would ripple through those around them. Henry returned as the day drew close, observing them with a quiet smile. "You have done well," he said to Lila. "You have shown that love and courage can alter even rigid expectations. You have brought change, not just to James and yourself, but to this family." Lila felt a warmth she had not anticipated. It was validation, but more than that, it was a sense of belonging, a recognition that her presence and choices had made a difference. She glanced at James, who nodded in quiet agreement, and together they felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by possibility. As evening approached, they gathered in the grand hall for a final moment of reflection. The setting sun's light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows and bathing the room in golden hues. Lila and James stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. The day had been long, filled with tension, revelation, and quiet triumph. But it had also been a day of gifts, not only the tangible gift from Henry, but the intangible gifts of understanding, acceptance, and transformation. Elizabeth remained distant yet present, her silence now carrying the weight of contemplation rather than judgment. Claire was absent, her anger unresolved, but the seeds of change had been planted. And Henry, ever steady, had provided the guidance and support that allowed Lila and James to navigate the delicate balance of love and family expectations. Lila and James stood together as night fell over Harrington Estate, looking out over the gardens. The silver necklace rested against Lila's chest, a constant reminder of the courage and compassion that had brought them this far. James squeezed her hand gently. "No matter what comes next, we have this. We have each other. And that is enough." Lila leaned into him, her heart full. "Yes, it is enough. And we will continue to build together." The estate was quiet now, the echoes of the day settling into a calm rhythm. Outside, the stars emerged, tiny points of light against the darkening sky. It was a world of possibilities, a future waiting to be written, and Lila and James were ready to face it hand in hand. The gifts of the day, the necklace, the words, the subtle shifts in hearts, were more than symbols. They were the foundation of transformation, the first steps toward a future defined not by inheritance or expectation, but by love, courage, and unwavering commitment. And in that quiet golden light, they understood that they were not merely surviving the challenges before them, they were shaping a new path that promised hope, growth, and the enduring power of their love. The morning air was still and cool as James and Lila prepared to leave Harrington Estate. The decision had been made in quiet determination the night before. They would not cling to a world built on expectations that sought to define them. They would step forward into their own future, unbound by the weight of legacy or the demands of a name. The great hall was filled with a calm stillness as they gathered their few belongings. Servants crept, respectful of the moment, aware of the significance of what was happening. Elizabeth stood by the doorway, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on them without a word. Henry lingered nearby, offering a slight nod of approval. At the same time, Claire remained absent, her anger unresolved. James adjusted the strap of his bag, glancing toward Lila. Her eyes were steady, her expression composed, though touched by sadness. They had known this departure would not be easy, but they embraced it as a necessary step toward building something true. Lila broke the silence. "I do not regret what we have done, not for a moment." She smiled softly. "No matter the cost, we are free." James stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "And that is what matters most. We will create our world together." They moved toward the carriage that waited outside, the soft rumble of wheels on stone echoing in the still morning. As they passed through the grand hall, Henry stepped forward. He placed a hand gently on James's shoulder. "You have my respect, James, and my blessing. Follow your own path." James nodded, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Father." Elizabeth watched them silently, her gaze lingering on Lila, as if searching for something beyond what could be spoken. Finally, she said, her voice quiet but deliberate, "I do not understand your choice, but I will not stop you. Go with your hearts." The words were unexpected. They carried neither praise nor condemnation, but an acceptance as significant as any blessing. Lila gave a slight nod in acknowledgement. "Thank you." The carriage doors closed softly, and James and Lila settled inside. The driver urged the horses forward, and the wheels began to turn, carrying them away from Harrington Estate and the world they had known. The stone pillars faded behind them, replaced by winding roads bordered by fields and trees. Silence settled between them inside the carriage, filled with the weight of departure and the promise of what lay ahead. James reached for Lila's hand, intertwining their fingers. "We are not leaving because we are weak," he said softly. "We are going because we are strong enough to build something better." Lila rested her head against his shoulder. "And that is what gives me courage. That we do not run away. We step forward, together." The journey was quiet, the landscape shifting from the familiar grandeur of Harrington Estate to the rolling countryside beyond. They passed small villages, fields of wildflowers, and streams that glittered in the morning light. Each mile felt like a shedding of old burdens and a step toward a life of their own. When they arrived in the small neighborhood they had chosen, it was full of color and life. The streets were lined with modest buildings, cafes spilling laughter and music into the air. Children played in the square, their laughter carrying across the stone paths. It was a world that welcomed them without expectation, where they could simply be themselves. James had arranged a modest apartment above a small art studio. It was a place they could call their own, free of the weight of a name or a legacy. Lila stepped inside, taking in the warm light that filtered through the windows, the quiet charm of the space. "It is perfect," she said softly, turning to James. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Perfect for us." That evening, they settled into their new home. The walls were bare, waiting to be filled with their life together. James unpacked his camera gear, setting up a small corner where he could work. Lila arranged her paints and brushes, preparing a small space for her art classes. They ate quietly, the air between them filled with relief, excitement, and the quiet realization of what they had chosen. Outside their window, the city breathed with life, the sounds of conversation and music drifting upward. Later, Lila called her mother Grace. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Mama, we are here. We have left and we are together." Grace's voice was warm and steady. "I know, my child. I am proud of you. You have chosen love and freedom. That is something no one can take from you." Lila smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Mama. Your words mean more than I can say." James watched her quietly, his heart full. He knew the road ahead would not always be easy. They would face challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But they had each other, the foundation they would build their future. The days followed were filled with the quiet work of building a life. James immersed himself in his photography, capturing the beauty of their new neighborhood and the faces of strangers who soon became friends. Lila began teaching art to children at a local community center, and her passion and warmth drew them in. Their lives intertwined in ways that were both simple and profound. They learned the rhythms of a life that was theirs alone, unshaped by the expectations of others. Every sunrise was a reminder of the choice they had made, and every sunset a promise of what was still to come. One afternoon, Michael, Lila's father, came to visit. He stood quietly in their small living room, looking around with pride and emotion. Lila approached him, taking his hands in hers. "Papa, I am home." Michael's voice trembled with sincerity. "I was worried for you, child. But I see now that you have found what matters. You have found your own path. That is the greatest gift a parent can receive." James stepped forward, offering his hand. Michael took it firmly, his gaze steady. "You have my respect, James. Treat her well." James nodded, his voice quiet but confident. "I will, always." Lila and James stood on their small balcony that evening, watching the city lights sparkle below. It was quiet, the world around them alive yet at peace. They held each other close, the weight of the past replaced by the promise of their own making. Lila whispered, "I feel free." James kissed her forehead, "And I feel at home." In that moment, they knew they had truly begun. They were no longer bound by the expectations of Harrington Estate or the judgments of others. They had chosen each other and the life they would build together. Freedom was not simply a matter of leaving. It was the courage to choose a path defined by love, truth, and the promise of tomorrow. And as they stood together, the night sky filled with stars, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next. Their journey was only beginning, but they would walk it hand in hand, free and unafraid. 3 months had passed since James and Lila left Harrington Estate. In that time, their lives had changed in subtle and profound ways. The air between them was lighter now, filled with the quiet certainty of choosing a path together. Their small apartment in a bustling neighborhood had become a sanctuary shaped by their dreams and the life they were building. The mornings began with the soft light of dawn spilling through tall windows. James would rise early to work in his photography studio while Lila prepared her art classes. The scent of fresh coffee and paint mingled in their home, a simple reminder of their chosen life. Outside their window, the streets were alive with movement. Street vendors opened their stalls, the laughter of children drifted through the air, and the hum of the city became a steady comfort. Lila had opened a small art school in the neighborhood. Her classes quickly became popular among the local children, drawing students from families of all backgrounds. The walls of her classroom were adorned with bright paintings and drawings filled with imagination and hope. Lila moved among her students with warmth and patience, guiding their hands and encouraging creativity. Her passion was evident in every lesson. Her students responded with trust and admiration. James had found a photography studio nearby, a modest space filled with light and character. He spent his days capturing portraits of the neighborhood, finding beauty in life's everyday moments. His work had begun to attract attention, and small exhibitions were held in local cafes and community spaces. Each photograph told a story, a testament to his talent and the vision that had once been hidden beneath family obligations. Their life together was grounded in shared purpose. They supported each other's work, celebrated each success, and faced challenges with a quiet determination. They had traded the grandeur of Harrington Estate for a life of authenticity and found peace in it. One afternoon, Lila's parents visited. Michael and Grace arrived with warm smiles and open hearts, eager to see the life their daughter had created. They entered the apartment, greeted by the scent of fresh paint and coffee, and immediately fell into conversation with Lila and James. Michael looked around the apartment with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Lila, I did not know what to expect when you left Harrington Estate, but seeing what you have built fills me with pride. You have chosen your own path. That is the greatest gift." Grace nodded in agreement, her eyes soft. "You have proven your strength, my child. You have faced challenges and stood by your heart. That is something to cherish." James stepped forward, offering his hand to Michael. "I promise to care for Lila as she deserves. I will build this life with her." Michael clasped his hand firmly, his gaze steady. "Then you have my blessing. Treat her well." Lila and James walked along the narrow streets near their apartment that evening. The air was filled with the sense of nearby cafes and bakeries, the glow of streetlights casting a warm light over cobblestone paths. They crept, speaking in soft tones about the future they were shaping. James stopped at a small bridge overlooking the river that wound through the city. The water reflected the lights of the buildings, shimmering like scattered jewels. Lila leaned on the railing beside him, her hand brushing his. "We have come so far," she said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if we could have imagined this life when we left." James smiled softly, his eyes on the water. "We always knew. We just needed the courage to step away and build it ourselves." Their days fell into a rhythm, filled with creativity and connection. Lila taught her classes, sometimes inviting James to photograph her students at work. His portraits captured more than their faces. They captured the joy and innocence of children finding their voices through art. Lila found inspiration in James's photographs, and they began planning an exhibition to combine their work. The exhibition became a shared dream. They envisioned a space where photography and art would blend, celebrating creativity and community. They spoke of inviting the children from Lila's classes, of showcasing their art alongside James's portraits. It became a project that brought them closer, their dreams entwined in a shared purpose. Lila received a letter one afternoon while they were working on the exhibition plans. The envelope was simple, the handwriting unfamiliar. She opened it with curiosity, finding a note from Elizabeth Harrington. "I do not fully understand your choice," she wrote, "but I am trying. I wish you both peace and courage as you build your life together." Lila read the note aloud to James, her voice soft. "It is not much, but it is something." James took her hand, his gaze steady. "It is enough. It shows that hearts can change." As the exhibition day approached, their little apartment became a flurry of preparation. Paintings were framed, photographs arranged, and invitations sent. The community had taken notice of their work, and anticipation grew. Their neighbors, friends, and even some who had once doubted them came to support the event. The night of the exhibition arrived with a gentle hum of excitement. The gallery was filled with light and color, the walls adorned with the children's paintings and James's portraits. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter, an atmosphere of celebration and connection. Lila stood quietly beside James as guests moved through the gallery. She watched how people paused before the art, and their expressions softened. This was more than an exhibition. It was a statement of hope, courage, and love. Henry attended the event, and his presence was quiet but meaningful. He approached them, his expression filled with respect. "You have created something beautiful," he said simply. "Not just the exhibition, but your life together." Lila smiled softly. "Thank you, Henry. That means more than you know." Elizabeth arrived later, her steps deliberate. She moved through the gallery quietly, her gaze resting on Lila and James. She said nothing at first, but her silence spoke volumes. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sincere. "I am still learning, but there is more to love and family than I once believed." The evening ended with a quiet moment between Lila and James. They stood together in the glow of the gallery, surrounded by the work that told their story. James took Lila's hand in his voice low. "This is our beginning." Lila nodded, her heart full. "Yes, it is, and we will write the rest of it together." Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the earth. The night air was filled with possibility, and they knew the road ahead would hold both challenges and triumphs. But they were ready to face them, hand in hand. Their future was theirs to build, shaped by love, courage, and the promise of a life defined, not by expectation, but by choice. In the quiet of that night, as they walked home through streets filled with light and laughter, Lila and James knew they had found something rare and powerful. They had found freedom, and they had seen each other. Their story was far from over. It was only the beginning.